guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing a crystal themed project. Now I've done crystal creatures before, but I haven't done a geode crystal and I thought that'd be really fun. So I'm going to have somewhere on the creature's body a crack where you can look into the creature and see crystals inside of it. I haven't decided where this crack is going to be yet. I kind of want it to be somewhere on the face. Anyways, today's project is going to be a crystal bat, and normally when I do bats, I like to do the vampire type bat, but this time around I'm going to do a fruit bat. So let's get started. Okay guys, like normal, I usually start out with showing you guys the pattern and then moving on to sewing, so that's what I'm going to do with this project as well. So these are the two pieces that you mainly need. I've kept the sewing for this very simple. You're going to have your body piece, you're going to need a top and a bottom. There's only going to be two, you're not going to do a left and a right, so there's just a top and a bottom. And then we have the pattern for our wings. The body pieces are going to be cut out in a nice fur fabric. I've got this cool cream color that I really like, and then the wings are going to be cut out in a very short fur fabric. So technically we are not working on the body right now. Right now we are going to be working on the wings. So I do have a little bit of sewing we need to do, and then I'm actually going to be painting the fabric of the wings. So the sewing that I need to do is basically adding the fingers to the webbing of the wings. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my fabric where I want that finger to be, and we're going to pin this, and then we're going to use our sewing machine to sew along this line. So I'm going to basically do this to about 3 or 4 different parts of the wings, that way it looks like there's multiple fingers. Now I'm not just sewing straight down creating a little tunnel, I'm actually going to taper it off as we get to the very tip of the wing portion. So I'm going to do this to both of the wings, and then I'm going to set it up to where we can paint them. So what you'll end up doing is you'll want to set up a surface to where you don't have to worry about staining anything. My cheapest solution for this is just tin foil, and I can reuse it later on if I need to. So after you have that set up, you have a nice safe area where you don't have to worry about ruining anything. We're going to start spraying down our fabric. So I'm just going to use a squirt bottle with normal water, and I'm just going to spritz the very tips of the wings, just creating a nice damp point at the very bottom of the wing. I'm not going to do the whole wing because I mainly want the color to be at the very ends of the wings. After we have that nice and damp, we can start adding our colors. So I'm going to use a few different variations of purple, that way I can make it fade from dark to light. I decided purple would look really nice with the cream color, and it's kind of my favorite color. So I'm just going to use my paintbrush, and I'm just going to kind of brush and dab it into place. I'm going to kind of create little stripes going down, so the very bottom of the wing is going to be darker, then I'm going to slowly lighten my paint as we go. After I have all my paint in place, I'm going to use that squirt bottle again, and I'm going to start spraying the wings. This is going to cause the paint to start bleeding into itself and creating a nice fade. After you have all your colors nice and blended, you'll probably want to clean up the extra water that's on your surface. This will help make the fabric dry faster because as the fabric's drying, it's going to start absorbing all the water around it. Also, another way you can speed up the drying process is you can just dab your fabric a little bit with the paper towel, but you do risk removing some of the color when you do this. Okay, it's been quite a while and our fabric is finally dry, and I'm going to start adding some extra details to it. So I thought a really cool idea was to make the wings look a little bit gemmed as well. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to take some white paint and I'm going to add some crackly line effect to it. So I'm just going to kind of brush little lines randomly onto the surface where I have the purple. Now you can add as many of these lines as you want and just go kind of crazy, or you could just add just a few to give it just the illusion of a nice crack. Now because our fabric isn't soaking wet like previously, this should dry quite quickly. Okay, once this little bit of painting has dried, we can start putting our wing together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a strip of fabric. How I got this was I used the pattern that we originally used for the wing, and I just kind of cut off a portion at the very top of the pattern and used that. So I'm going to be using that same cream fur color, and I'm going to be using my E6000 and hot glue to glue it to the very top of the wing. Now you want to make sure that these two layers don't fully connect all the way through because we do need to run a wire through it. So after we have our fur fabric glued into place, we're going to set these aside to dry. While those are drying, we can work on some other things for our bat. So now we're going to make a pair of ears for our bat, and I thought it'd be really fun to use the same technique that we did for the wings and paint the inside parts of the ears. So these two triangle pieces are the very front or inside parts of the ears, and I'm going to end up spraying them down and adding some purple stripes to them. Now for these, because I wanted the stripes to be a little bit more prominent and not blend together so much, I did end up going over it a second time while it was still wet. That way it's still kind of blended but not completely. So we're going to let those dry as well, and then after those are dry we can start putting our ears together. So I have a pattern piece, basically the same thing but out of the fur fabric, and I'm going to sew these two layers together. So I'm just going to go around this and then flip it right side out. Okay, now I'm going to work on putting our wire frame together. So I'm going to use that same paper pattern that we used to cut our fabric out as a guide to help me get the wires measured out correctly. So I'm just going to lay that pattern out, and I'm going to use that to help bend the wires into place and everything like that. So for this pattern, you're going to need a piece of wire for the spine, which is actually quite short, and then you're going to need one piece of wire for the legs and one piece of wire for the wings. So I'm going to take a thinner gauge wire. If you're curious, the wire I'm already using is 14 gauge, but the wire that I need to use to put everything together is going to be a 20 gauge. So I'm going to use that and wrap all of these pieces together. While I was at it, I made a very simple wire frame for our bat's feet. So I think I'll probably start on the clay right now, so I'm going to start on the clay feet and then we'll move on to making the face. So the first thing that we need to do for our feet is we need to add some claws to the tips of each wire. So I'm going to ball up a little bit of clay and I'm going to push it onto the end of the wire, and then I'm going to kind of roughly shape it into kind of a claw shape. So I'm going to do this to all of the tips of the wires, and then after we have all of our claws in place, we're going to bake them for about 20 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Now normally with my feet I cover the bottom and then I let that bake for a little bit and then I cover the top. Well, we're only going to be covering the very bottoms of the feet, so we're not going to focus on sculpting the tops. We're going to end up covering that in fur later. So we're just going to work on the bottom of the feet now. So I'm going to make sure all my wires are completely covered in clay, and then I'm going to start blending in and creating little creases using my tools. Once I like the shape of the feet, I'm going to put this in the oven again at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 minutes this time. While our feet are baking, we can work on our face. Now the first thing I need to do for our face is I need to make that geode that I want to add in the forehead. So I'm going to have this weird little crack in the forehead that has a geode crystal in it. So I need to make that first before we make the face. So I'm going to roll out a thin layer of clay so we can have a surface to work with, and I have all my little gems laid out already. They're already in the order of how I want to use them because I want the center to be light, and I'm going to have it gradually get darker as you go to the edge of the geode. So I have my clay laid out, and now I need to make sure that this stays in a V shape. So I'm going to use a little bit of tin foil, and I'm going to make sure it's nice and thick, and I'm going to kind of fold it into a V, and we're going to put our clay right in the middle of that. So this should help hold it into the shape that we want it while we're working on everything. Now I'm going to try something new, and I don't know if this will even make a difference, but I am going to try it. I'm going to start painting my clay with my acrylic to add a bit of a coloring behind the gems. That way, if there's any gaps, you don't see just straight clay, because it's going to be nearly impossible to paint the clay in between the gems without getting paint all over them, and then you have to worry about cleaning them, and it's just a nightmare. You're not going to get your paint off of these gems because they're going to be really clustered tightly together. So it's just going to be easier to try and paint the clay underneath before we put the gems on. Now doing this, the paint is not going to dry. It's going to stay kind of tacky, so you have to be careful not to bump it while you're working on it. So I'm just going to be basically painting the colors of the geode in the order that I want it. So the middle is going to be that white, and then I'm going to fade from kind of a pink to a purple. So now I'm going to start taking my gems and I'm going to start pushing them into the clay. I first tried to use a pair of pliers that I put a little bit of hot glue on the end because I don't have like the little plastic ones, and they were just a little bit too bulky. So even though I was trying to save bumping it, I ended up having to use my fingers anyways. So I'm going to start with my white gems in the middle, and as I get further and further out, I'm going to switch over to my pinks and my purples. Now I'm trying to get them as close together as possible, that way there's no gaps, but if there is gaps, hopefully this paint will kind of hide the fact that there's a gap. Okay, I really like how this came out. So far it looks great. I think the paint helped, even though it made it a nightmare putting everything together because it was just sticking everywhere, but it did end up coming out really nice in the end. So I'm going to cut off all my extra clay, and then I'm going to put a nice little lip going around the geode. I'm going to kind of blend that in, make it a little bumpy, and then we're going to bake this in the oven. I'm going to probably have to have it propped up so that it doesn't kind of peel open. So I'm going to have these little glass containers holding it up while it's in the oven so it stays nice and closed. So we're going to probably bake this at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 30 to 35 minutes. And then after that's done baking and is cooled to touch, we can start working on our face. Okay, so for our face, we're going to take a lump of tin foil, kind of roughly round it off, and then we're going to also push in a nice little crevice for our gem to sit in. After we have our gem in place, we're going to end up covering the rest of the tinfoil in clay. We're also going to end up taking a little bit more tinfoil to make the snout of our bat. So we're going to push that tinfoil into place on our clay where we want the face to start, and then we're going to add clay to that as well. We're going to make sure everything is blended together and nice and smooth, that way we have a nice clean surface to work with for adding our details. So the first bit of detail that I'm going to add is going to be the eyes for our bat. So I want them nice and big and bug-eyed, so I'm going to use pretty large balls of clay. I'm going to push them into the clay where I want them, and then we're going to add a little bit of clay going around the eye to make the eyelid. Now we're not adding a whole lot of detail to this face because, like most of my creatures, I do want to fur the face. So the eyes, nose, and mouth are the main details along with the gem. So everything else is not going to be really worked with, we're just going to make sure that it's the shape that we want. So the next thing that I'm going to work on for our bat is going to be the nose. So I'm going to add a little bit of clay to the very end of the snout, and we're going to blend that in and start using our tools to make the shape of the nostrils and kind of pushing in and stuff like that. After that, I'm going to use my tools and I'm going to mark out where I want the mouth to go, and then I'm going to kind of push it in to make it look like it's slightly open. I'm also adding holes for where I want the ears to go, so I'm going to create nice little slashes where I want those to go, because we're going to have some wires in the ears so they stand up nicely. Last thing I need to do is I need to clean up the extra clay that's built up around the face, and then we're going to bake this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 to 55 minutes. While that's baking, I'm going to take our clay feet and I'm going to start painting them. We're going to paint and resin the feet first, and the face is going to wait until after we have it all put together. So for the bottoms of the feet, I'm going to be painting them a nice light purple. After that purple has dried, I'm going to go over it a little bit with some pink just to add some highlights to it and make it look a little bit more realistic. And then for the claws, I'm just going to paint them a nice dark purple. I want them to kind of look like the gems. So I'm going to let my paint dry for a little bit, and then I'm going to apply a thin layer of resin over everything and let that sit and dry. These are going to have to dry overnight. Okay, it's the following day and we can start putting our bat together. So I'm going to start with our wire frame, and I'm going to add the feet to the wire frame. So I'm going to use those wires that are hanging out of the very back of the foot, and I'm going to connect those to the wire frame. So I'm just going to use a 20 gauge and start wrapping everything together. Next, I'm going to sew the wings onto the body. So we're going to take the fur fabric pieces for the body, the top and bottom. We're going to make sure the fur is on the inside when we're sandwiching them, and we're going to pin the wing in between the two layers. We're going to sew down this, and then we're going to end up having to roll up this wing and kind of shove it into the body and do the same thing to the other side for the wing. So it's going to kind of create a nice tube where the wings are connected on the inside, and then you're just going to flip this right side out and your wings are going to pop out and they're going to be all connected. Now we're going to add this to the wire frame. Now remember, the very top and the very bottom are both open, so we're going to run our wire frame right down the middle of it. We're going to take our E6000 and a little bit of hot glue, and we're going to glue the fabric for the legs all the way around the base of the foot. We're going to do this to both feet, and we're going to let them dry for a little bit, and then we're going to sew the gap in between the two feet closed. Now we can start adding the wires to the wings. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the wire for the wing and you're going to put it in between the two fur fabric layers at the very top. Then you're going to take those layers and you're going to kind of sandwich them together, and you're going to sew around the wire, closing up the very top of the wing. We're going to do this to both of the wings, and then after that we're going to stuff the rest of the body. Now we can add the head to the piece. So we're going to glue this onto the very end of the wire for the neck. We're going to let that dry, and then we can start gluing the fabric around the base of the head, closing up the rest of the body. Now the body is basically done at this point, and we just need to finish up the face. So I'm going to start by adding the ears to it. So I'm going to add a wire for each ear. I'm going to glue these into place, I'm going to let them cool, and then we're going to run the ears over the wire and glue the base of the ear onto the head. I'm going to add a little bit of fur fabric around it to kind of hide the seams, and then we can start furring the face of our bat. So for furring the face, I've made a bunch of little trimmings from the same fur fabric that we used for the body, and we're going to be gluing this onto the surface of the face. So I'm going to be using E6000, and I'm just going to create a nice layer of it where I want to add the fur. I'm going to do this in portions, that way it's just not so sticky and messy. So I'm going to put down a layer of the glue where I want it. I'm going to push in the little fur bits into place. I'm going to make sure it's nice and smooth, and we're just going to keep doing this to the rest of the face until everything is covered. Of course, you're not going to cover your details like your nose, eyes, and your gems. Once you have everything completely covered, you're going to let this dry for a few hours, and then we can start on painting the face. So while the fur on the face is drying, I'm going to start working on the feet. So I'm going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be furring the very tops of the feet. So I'm going to apply my E6000 glue on the very top of the foot and down all the very tops of the toes. Then I'm going to take my fur trimmings and just kind of push them into place, make sure that I like where they're positioned, and we're going to let those dry as well. So the first bit of painting that I'm going to do is I'm going to try and match the color of the fur, and I'm going to paint around the eyes and blend it into the fur. And then to make our geode look a little bit more realistic, I'm going to add some gray going around the lip of it to make it kind of look like a stone fading into the fur. I'm also going to give this a white highlight to help it stand out a bit. Now the eyes, I want them to be also a nice purple color, so I'm going to primer them with a nice light purple, and then the iris is going to be a darker purple, and then the pupil is going to be black, and then I'm going to actually add some gold highlights to this to just kind of make them stand out a bit more. And then after all that's dried, I'm going to add a white highlight to make it look like there's a reflection. After I'm happy with all those major details, I decided that I wanted to add some markings on the face, just to add a little bit more detail to it and give it more character. So I'm going to be using some whites and purples and just adding some line work on the face. After that, we're going to let our paint dry, and then we're going to resin portions of the face. So I'm just going to apply resin to around the lip of the gem, the eyes, the nose, and then the opening of the mouth. That way everything is just kind of protected, and the fur is already nice and protected, so you don't have to worry about resining over that. Plus, you would end up kind of ruining the texture of the fur. Okay guys, and that's how I did a crystal geode bat. I had so much fun making him. I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so make sure to check the links down below for that if you want to buy anything. I do still have some sales going on, so make sure to check those links. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!